Welcome, everyone, and welcome to our Thursday evening webinars. I'm joined here by force of habit, Benjamin Herbert, okay, from Cambridge. And as you may know, MLA offers Cambridge exams. We do Cambridge preparation courses online for our pre-departure courses. And then in our colleges in the summer, we have in the UK, in Ireland, and in America. In our New York centre this year, we're doing Cambridge exams. And for that reason, we're doing collaboration with Cambridge, who's going to offer some advice for teachers training students today on the B2 reading and use of English exam. With that, I'll hand over to Benjamin.
Okay, thank you, Josh. I'll just share my screen. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Ben, and I'm a professional learning and development specialist at Cambridge University Press and Assessment, which basically means I train teachers. I've been working in EFL for about 16 years now, mainly in the Czech Republic, where I'm based, but also in the Middle East and North Africa. And during that time, I've also worked as a teacher trainer as well. So today, we're going to take a look at the B2 First for Schools exam with particular reference to the reading and use of English paper. Now, I thought we could begin just with an overview of the B2 First for Schools exam as a whole. So we can see here that the exam is divided into four parts, four papers. But you can see I've been a bit sneaky and I've hidden some of the information. So can anyone tell me in the chat how long is the reading and use of English paper? We can see here that there are 7 parts to it, but how much time do candidates get for it? Please let me know in the chat box. We have 1 hour 15. Oh, 20 minutes. That's
I
that's a
mean,
bit
students
shorter.
would be happy if that was the truth.
Yeah. 40, 15, 60. Okay, so 90. So I'm seeing a whole range here from about 15 minutes up to 90. Um, it's 1 hour and 15 minutes. So that first answer um, was correct. And if we compare this to some of the other Cambridge exams, such as the C1 Advanced, we can see that they're given just slightly less time. It's about 90 minutes for the reading and use of English if we go up one level. What paper do candidates get 1 hour and 20 minutes for? Ah, very good. I can see in the chat. Yep, that's the writing. And if we look at the listening, it says here approximately 40 minutes. So obviously that's because, in different exams, different listening texts, different recordings will take slightly different amounts of time. I did notice in the chat just now that when we were talking about the duration of the reading and use of English paper, someone said that there was some time to transfer their answers over to the answer paper. That's not actually the case. In the reading and use of English paper, the candidates need to have completed the entire exam within that 1 hour and 15 minutes. So they need to have their answers on the answer paper after after 75 minutes. With the listening paper, it's slightly different. In the paper-based exam, candidates are given some time after to transfer their answers over from their notes to the official answer paper. So that's the part of the exam where that extra little bit of time is given. Does anyone know how many parts there are to the listening exam? Good. I see a few of you have it there. Yep, it's 4. And then finally, how long does the speaking exam last? I see someone said 15 or 10 or 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Again, a few numbers are jumping out at me in the chat. It's actually 14 or 20 minutes, and that depends on how many candidates are sitting the exam. Normally, there will be two candidates in the exam, so the exam should take about 14 minutes, but depending on numbers on the day, it might be necessary to have a group of three, and in that case, the exam takes that little bit longer, just so that all the candidates have a similar amount of time in which to speak and demonstrate their ability in spoken English to the examiners. So let's now focus in on the reading and use of English paper. We can see here the seven different parts of the reading and use of English, and I think many of you should already be fairly familiar with these task types. Today, I want to focus on just three of the task types, which candidates, in my experience, as a teacher who has prepared learners for the B2 First for Schools exam, I found that they often require like a little bit more help in. So we're going to focus on parts 3, 4, and 6. If you would like to find out more information about the other parts of the reading and use of English paper, which we're not focusing on today, I've included some information in the slides at the end of this presentation, where you can basically you can scan a QR code and you can find the handbook for teachers for exams for the B2 First for Schools, and you can find more details about, well, all of the exam and its constituent parts there. So let's begin with part 3.
I
So
might I might note that these are like in my opinion, these are sort of the parts of the exam that might require the most sort of explanation. The sort of things a lot of the other parts is
yeah,
comprehension or gap fills are often quite simple, but these sort of ones I think a student going into the exam not knowing what they have to do would really have some problems with these parts, I think.
yeah, I agree. And also, I think these are the parts where if teachers take the time when preparing their learners for the exam to really work on not just the technique but also the background knowledge that learners need, especially for parts 3 and 4, it can really help them in the exam. So yeah, in part 3, we can see that the candidates are given a short text and there are some gaps, there are some words missing. They are given words. In the case of the paper-based exam, which we're looking at now, you can see they're on the right-hand side of the paper, but the words are in an incorrect form. So in this task, as we can see with the example, actually, example 0, the candidates need to take that word on the right-hand side. They need to identify the type of word that fits in the gap, and they then need to change the word so that it fits grammatically into the gap. So just to go through that in a bit more detail then, what we would ideally hope our candidates would understand in terms of technique is that they should try to read that text quickly at the beginning, just skim it to get the gist and a general understanding of what it's about. Because as we'll see later, it's that understanding of the meaning of the text that can make the difference when it comes to selecting the correct answer. And it's important that they make sure they change the words that they write. And as we'll see in just a couple of moments, occasionally just simply changing the word class is not enough. It's sometimes the case that candidates might need, for example, to add a third person S if it's a verb. They might need to pluralize a word if it's a noun, for example. Sometimes the use of prefixes might be required. One issue I often notice that some of my learners had at B2 level when I was a teacher and preparing them for this type of task was that the candidates were just they'd they'd identify the word class they needed, they would change the word, and then that was it. They would move on to the next question. And it's important that they take the time to really read through the sentence again and just make sure that the word fits in terms of the grammar and the meaning of the word. And I think this is where our learners' knowledge, not just of morphology, but also vocabulary more generally, really comes into play. So it's possible that there might be more than one possible option that the learners can think of, and they're not quite sure which one is the correct one. Or it might be that they're really unsure. We might want to develop their brainstorming capacity when it comes to this. So in the chat box, how do you think we as teachers could prepare learners for this task in the exam? Hmm. Okay, I see someone said encourage them to read newspapers and books, and I think that's definitely a great idea. When I was a teacher, I could always tell which learners were taking the time to expose themselves to English outside the classroom. And I would argue that at B2 level and even higher, at C1 and C2, they need that depth of knowledge of vocabulary that reading and listening to the language will give them. So that's definitely something that they can do long term to improve their chances of success in the exam. I thought one thing we could do is if we're practicing this with our learners in the classroom, is do some brainstorming activities. So, for example, with number 17, rather than just simply asking the learners what the answer is, why not first of all ask them to think what words can they think of which come from the word concentrate? You could brainstorm them and then ask them to look more carefully, more closely at the text, and then select the correct answer. So I think this technique can be useful because we're getting learners to think about the relationships between words, and we're kind of getting them used to that mental process of quickly brainstorming words in a word family. Something else we can do with that idea of developing our learners' vocabulary and knowledge of morphology over time is to develop their vocabulary through mind maps as you go through the academic year. Now, very often we might use mind maps to help our learners record vocabulary in terms of semantics. You might, for example, ask them to group things according to, I don't know, if it's related to geography, to some different environment types, for example. So thematic mind mapping. But it's also possible to encourage our learners to draw mind maps based on morphological features. So, for example, at perhaps B2 level, I could give my learners a word like build, and I could ask them, well, what words can we form from build? I might ask them, what type of word is build? It's a verb. Okay, what words can we create from build? And we might have something like this. And already, this is quite a useful technique. I can ask my learners, well, what word class is built? Okay, it's an adjective. Okay, good. But notice builder and building are both nouns. So this is a good learning opportunity in terms of the exam, because one mistake I often noticed my learners making when I gave them mock exams back when I was preparing them for this was that sometimes they would identify, let's say that they needed a noun in the gap, but they would just write down the first noun that came to mind. Now, in some cases, that might be the case. There might only be one noun that can be formed from a verb, but sometimes more than one noun might be possible. So it's important that we make our learners aware that it's not simply a case of just finding a word that's related to that STEM word that's in the correct class. They need to check that it fits the meaning of the sentence. But we could also encourage them to build up, to develop their mind map. So I might ask, well, that word in the middle, build, does it change ever? And oh yeah, we can have third person S. We could ask, how could the other words change? Well, the nouns could be pluralized. And sometimes I've even encouraged my learners to, as I'm showing you here, write that S in a different color. So visually they can see that these changes might need to be made. And then I might say, well, are there any like prefixes at B2 level? Can we add anything to like change the meaning of these words? And well, from build, we could have rebuild. And here we haven't changed the word class, we've changed the meaning. So again, we could add our third person S. From built. And again, I would elicit from the learners, we could have rebuilt, well built, for example. So just getting them to think about how these word families can be constructed. And what's great is if they're writing these in their notebooks, you can get them to work individually and then in pairs. They can compare their ideas. So it's a great opportunity for getting them to like help each other and help develop these maps together. Also, if it's in their notebooks, well, it's an excellent way of then reviewing their vocabulary later on. They can go back and look. You could even perhaps get them to go back to some of their mind maps from the beginning of the year and see if they can now add to these based on what they've learned through the school year. So these can be really powerful, and they really do if we use them. Not every lesson, but every couple of weeks or so, they can really help us prepare our learners for this part of the exam. Okay, so with that in mind, I thought we could perhaps just take a little look at this ourselves. We already looked at number 17, but just before we move on, could you please tell me in the chat what would the answer to number 18 be? So remember, identify the word type, change the word, and then see if you need to make any other changes. Aha, good. So yeah, success. I I also learned very quickly when I started teaching that if I was going to prepare my learners for exams, I also needed to try answering the questions myself as part of the planning. It really helped me get into the mind of my learners and see like what they would need to do in the exam and what they might struggle with in the exam. Okay. Let's now look at another part of the exam, at part 4. So part 4 is one part which I find learners often struggle with the most. That's what I experienced as a teacher. But there are some techniques that we can teach our learners to help them be able to approach these tasks in the exam. For those of you who are unfamiliar with this task, we can see there's an example on the left-hand side of the page. The idea is that in this task, the learners are given a sentence. So we can see here the example sentence is, prizes are given out when the school year finishes. They are also given a word in capital letters. So here the word is place. There is then a second sentence underneath, which is incomplete. What they need to do is complete that sentence using that word in capital letters so that the meaning is the same. as the original sentence. It's also very important that they follow the rules. So they should not change that word in capital letters in any way. And there's a word limit. They need to use between 2 and 5 words. It's also important to remember that in this task, contractions like don't, won't, for example, count as 2 words. One exception is can't, because cannot can be written as 1 word. But as a general rule, contractions would count as 2. Okay, let's then take a look. First of all, in a bit more detail at what our candidates need to do, and also how we can help them with this. So yeah, they need to make sure that they really understand the meaning of that first sentence. So it's important that they take some time to look at that sentence, maybe think about the grammar, like the subjects and objects in the sentence, really think about what information is being conveyed, and then identify the parts, like the information in sentence one and sentence two, that are the same, because that tells them what the gap is, what that sort of meaning gap is between the original sentence and the second one. They then need to make sure they use that provided word to complete the sentence below. So let's take a look here. We can see in this example, we have our original sentence, we have our word in capitals, we have seen, and then we have the incomplete sentence below. Well, what I would do is I would get my learners, get them to get their pens or their pencils, and they need to either highlight or underline the information which is contained in both of the sentences. So we can see over 6 months is present in both, and also the word I. So by doing this, they can now really focus on that information, that meaning in the top sentence, which hasn't been included in the bottom one. And they can start analyzing it maybe grammatically and thinking, well, what's actually going on here? Well, we can see that we've got a present perfect construction here. And we can see we have the word since. We know that since is often used with the present perfect for the unfinished past. And then maybe we could get our learners, again, to just brainstorm possible solutions. These don't have to be correct, but get them just realizing that they can come up with multiple possible answers. So we might have something like this. I have seen Dan since over 6 months. Well, okay, that's got that information there, but it's not grammatically correct. So I might then elicit from the class, okay, this is a good idea. We've got the information there, but how can we correct this? And we can see here, we've got the present perfect. We've got Dan. Notice like that transition from since to for, because instead of a moment, we now have a period of time. So that's working better. And then hopefully we should have something like this at the end. But I would go through that iterative process with my learners. I would encourage them to generate just possible answers without the fear of getting them wrong, but then going through that mental process of analyzing the answer and figuring out, oh, I need to tweak it here. It's not quite right.
One thing that,
Hmm.
if you don't mind me just
Yeah.
pointing out, is I see in the chat a few people are using him in the second sentence. I think it's important we point out that like
Mm.
these should effectively be reversed
Yeah.
too.
Mm.
So if you said Dan in the first, you need to use Dan in the second. You can't use a pronoun to refer to something in the first sentence because they contain all the information
Yeah.
from the first one.
Yeah. I think um, this task type appears in some other Cambridge exams as well, such as the C1 Advanced. And at whatever level I've been preparing my learners for, I've always encouraged them really um, try to reproduce that original meaning as closely as you can. And this would mean, as you said, if a name is mentioned in the first sentence, making sure that that name is included in the second one. So let's try doing it ourselves now. I've got another one here. Um, can anyone tell me in the chat what the answer is? I'm seeing there's a bit of a disagreement in the chat box. So let's go through that process together. We can see we have the match went ahead in both sentences, so we know we don't need to repeat that in terms of meaning. And in the first sentence, we have the wet weather. In the second sentence, we have raining, and these mean basically the same. I think, we would encourage our learners to think, these words are close enough in meaning that I don't need to repeat them. But we have that word despite. So again, if my learners were maybe a little bit confused or stuck in this in the classroom, I would take this as an opportunity to try to elicit from them, what do we use despite for? What meaning is that conveying? And it conveys that idea of contrast. So I might say, okay, well, even often goes with the word though. That also conveys the idea of contrast. So again, we might go through that process. The match went ahead even though raining. The match went ahead even though it was raining. So there we go. I think one thing to note about this type of question is that if you look in the handbook for teachers, when you see the answers for these tasks, there's often like a little I think in computer programming it's called the pipe operator, but this like straight line, and basically that tells you if you're marking the mock test that if your learners in the mock test have got everything on the left hand side correct, they get 1 point. And if they have everything on the right hand side correct, they get 1 point. And I find this can be a useful thing to point out to learners. I did this when I was training my students, because if they know that there are 2 points available, I think in the exam, it can help reduce the stress. It's not a case of you get either 2 points or nothing for the question, but also by doing this, we can help them break down what they need to do to get the points. And if we look here, it would be logical to me that they would get 1 point for knowing to use though. So, and this is very often the case. Just think, what do I need to do to include that word? Very often it will be some, maybe a preposition that's needed, or they might need to know that they need an ing or an infinitive after it, something like that. So think, okay, I need to include the word that's likely to get me 1 point. And then I need to complete the sentence grammatically. That's likely to get me the other point. This is not a hard and fast rule, but when I, as a teacher, looked through those sample answers, it was clear to me that that was what was going on. So that's one way we could get our learners to think about this type of question.
I think it's a point worth repeating that
Yeah.
as far as I know, you can correct me if I'm wrong. This is the only part in the reading and use of English that is each question is worth
Yeah.
2 points. And so, as Valentina said in the chat, that this is one of the fundamental parts. And I guess that
Mm.
could mean, in a sense, that the students could be expected to maybe slow down a little, have a
Mhm.
little bit more time to concentrate on it. And to be honest, sometimes I encourage my students that if they're not sure, then they might have part of it. They could take a risk at the other. Okay,
Yeah.
and 1 out of 2 is not bad. Okay, okay.
Exactly. And I think this touches on a wider question of exam technique when it comes to the pace at which learners work during the exam. Um, One of the benefits of giving your learners a full mock exam is that they can have that experience of trying to complete the exam within the 75 minutes in the case of the reading and use of English paper, and they can actually see how they need to manage their time. And one thing I would often do after I'd given my learners a mock exam and they'd got their results back is we'd actually discuss like, okay, how did you manage your time in the exam? And I'd get them discussing it in groups. We'd have a class discussion, and they'd give ideas on the most effective ways they found to manage their time. And very often, a class consensus would develop with regards to the parts of the exam that you can often get done relatively quickly, the ones that you might want to spend a bit more time on, the ones that require maybe a bit more time for reviewing the questions at the end of the exam. So yeah, that's an important part of exam technique itself. It's not just the techniques that the learners need for each individual part, but it's also how they manage their time in the exam as a whole.
And one of the things I often do at the B2 level is get the students to do a lot of practice in
Mm,
these sort of general transformations, which I think a lot of these things you'll see, there's often things like going from active to passive or vice
mhm,
versa, going from direct speech to indirect speech or reporter speech
mm,
or vice versa, going from like reality to sort of hypothetical,
mm,
using one contrasting word like despite and using another going from a and sometimes these in combination too, that they can
mhm,
sometimes it'll be, for example, a phrasal verb with a
mm.
non-phrasal verb, these sort of things, and at higher levels it's even expressions.
Yeah.
But those sort of things, I think a lot of those, if they can master that sort of
Mm,
going from active to passive, going from reality to conditional,
mm.
then they're going to be able to get through these really quickly. Okay.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and I think reported speech is another one which can sometimes occur. Um, yeah, before we move on, I think yeah, it's important to give learners practice of this, but also just to be aware that if you do use this material again in the context of a mock exam, whether it's a full mock or you're just using part four, it can be quite good once the learners have completed it and you've given feedback, get them to look through and identify what they had to do, what they had to transform, because it's just one of those things. I think as teachers, we can tell our students things many times. If they actually sit down and analyze it and work it out for themselves, if we do this just repeatedly, every time you practice this part, they will see themselves, those patterns forming. They will see what sort of things often can occur in the paper. So, as always, feedback here is really important, and we should take our time helping our learners see through the feedback what they need to do
I mean,
and what techniques they can use.
I've been doing with one of my students some C2
Mhm.
transformations, and they really like you can almost see smoke coming out of my ears when I do them. They're not easy even for a mother
Yeah,
tongue speaker, okay, a teacher as well.
yeah, I think uh, Yeah, I remember when I was doing my CELTA many years ago, I observed an exam preparation class and was given one of these tasks. And yeah, as a native speaker who basically had walked in off the street, I didn't know anything about Cambridge exams. It was quite challenging because I wasn't really aware of what I needed to do or how I needed to think about the task. So it is important that we give our learners the tools that they need to be able to approach these tasks. The final part of the reading and use of English paper we'll look at today is part six. So part six is one of the reading tasks. And in this task, the candidates are given a text. It's a bit of a longer text, as you can see. It's divided into several paragraphs, and there are some gaps missing. So we can see here we have 6 gaps, and the the gaps are given. There are some sentences there that complete the gaps. However, as we saw, there were 6 gaps. There are 7 sentences. So this means that in terms of the design of the task, the candidates can't use elimination to help them decide what the answers are. They need to use their reading skills. So I'd always make sure that I would encourage my learners when we were practicing this in class to read that base text, the text with the gaps carefully, and make sure they understand the main idea. And we'll come back to this, the importance here of understanding the main idea. And then, as well as understanding the main idea, they can also use their knowledge of linking devices, pronouns, cohesive devices, perhaps similar vocabulary, so the use of synonyms, for example, to help them decide which sentence should go in which gap. And of course, they should make sure that the completed paragraphs make sense in the text as a whole, because obviously that missing sentence needs to fit the overall context of the text. So that's why having that understanding, that general overview of the text is important. So I think when our learners approach this task in the exam, there are basically 2 broad strategies that they can use. And these broad strategies relate to the 2 different reading processes, which we should know as teachers. So the first one is what's called bottom-up processing. So we've got the idea with bottom-up processing that a reader, in this case, one of your learners, a candidate, would be able to identify individual words, maybe even needing to decode them from individual letters. But by identifying the individual words, they should be able to decode the grammar and sentence structures in the text, and that by doing this, they combine all of this information to generate their understanding of the text as a whole. So the idea being that meaning can be determined through the understanding of individual words. There is, however, another reading process. There's top-down reading. So with top-down reading, what readers do is they use their pre-existing knowledge to be able to some extent, like predict what's going to be included in the text, combine that with their background knowledge, and that then means that if, as they're reading, there's any words or phrases which are new to them, they can determine to some extent the meaning of unclear words or parts of the text from this overall context, which they understand. And very often, when we're reading, both processes can happen simultaneously. But in this type of task, we can get our learners ideally to use these as strategies, to use these deliberately to help them answer the question. So I have here an example of some exam preparation material. This is from a title from Cambridge called Prepare. And we can see here that we've got our first gap, our first sentence that's missing. Now, if we encourage our learners to read through the whole text quickly at the beginning, then that should give them a good idea of the not just the topic, but also the general flow of ideas in the text. They should have a good idea, just a very general idea of like what the general topic of each paragraph is. So they can begin to use that top-down processing. So if we look at that first gap, I could get my learners focus on that paragraph. What's the topic of the paragraph? And we could see here it's about talking about emotions, feelings, and advertising. Because it's the introduction to the text. In the classroom, I'd often get my learners to do this individually. I'd give them just a short amount of time and then get them to compare their ideas with their partner. And then if we look at the sentences, well, we should now, with this top-down knowledge, be able to rule out some of the sentences. We can see that if a sentence is talking about something very specific and it's not talking about something related to the topic of that paragraph, it's unlikely to be the correct answer. So we might see here, okay, so we've got a reference to advertisements, but we've also got some synonyms here being used. So we can move from that top-down understanding to help us rule out, let's say out of the 7, we've ruled out 5. Maybe if I need to choose between 2, I can now start doing the bottom-up processing. I can start looking at the linking words, the synonyms, trying to find out which sentence would fit best. And notice we've got here appeal directly to your emotions, suggestion, and we've got here persuade. So the idea is like once they've chosen their answer, they should read it aloud. This is in the class, obviously, not in the exam, to see if it makes sense. And looking at this, we can see that although, with B, we do have that repetition of the idea of advertisements. It doesn't fit in terms of the meaning. So the answer is C. So I've often encouraged my learners to look at it this way. Start with their knowledge of the big picture, allow that to then give them the opportunity to rule out a large number of the possible answers, and then start looking at the smaller picture. I remember many years ago when I was doing my Delta, I actually focused on this type of task for one of my assessed lessons, and I can't remember for author now, but she had this wonderful way of describing it. She said that the top-down processing is like being an eagle soaring high above the countryside, and you look down and you see like the big picture and the different features of the text, and that looking at the individual words and the relationships between them, that's a little bit like being a rabbit. You're right down on the ground looking at the detail. And I actually told this to one of my teenage classes, and they were like, Ben, this is silly. Why are you telling us about eagles and rabbits? But they went and took the exam, and the next day I asked them, how did the exam go? And they said, oh, it went well. And one of them said, yeah, I was really stuck with the part 6, but I remembered what you said about the eagle and the rabbit, and and I used it. So it does sound a bit crazy, but at least in the case of this one student, the advice Well, I hope it worked. She at least remembered it in the in the exam. Um,
In our webinar last week, we had Charles talking about the writing exam and
mhm.
he's talking about topic sentences and paragraphs. And it's, I think these sort of skills can really build on each other.
Yeah.
Here we're looking at, you know, something missing from the paragraph. So we've got to use our knowledge of the paragraph to work
Mhm.
out what goes in there. And that the topic sentence, the first sentence of the
Mhm.
paragraph, and the rest of the paragraph can give
Mhm.
us a real idea of that. And
Mhm.
I think that's, these sort of skills can, reinforce each other. And I always, emphasize to the students that, when you're looking
Mhm.
at these comprehension things,
Mhm.
these are models of writing too.
Mhm.
These are things that,
Yeah.
okay, maybe they can't reproduce it at that level right now,
Mhm.
but these are sort of things that these are well written,
Yeah.
got variety, they've got topic sentences and things. Learn from these, and
Mm.
this is how, with your writing, hopefully someone would be able to take a sentence away and be able to work which one to go back in as well.
Yeah, and yeah, back when I was a teacher, I would often encourage my learners if we'd done a reading or a listening, I'd always say, well, in your free time, when you get home, take a look at that text, identify, are there any useful collocations that you think you might want to use? Are there any phrases here that you would like to use perhaps in your writing or in your speaking? Because as you said, um, the level at which these texts are written, okay, is maybe slightly higher than what we would want or expect our learners to produce, but they are very good models that they can to at least some degree try to emulate or follow. Um, just before I finish off, at the end of my slides, which you'll get a copy of, I've included some extra resources for you. There's a QR code with a link to the B2 First for Schools webpage on the Cambridge webpage. There you can also find the B2 First for Schools Handbook for Teachers for Exams. So this handbook contains like a full mock exam. You can see all the different task types. For each task type, there are some tips for how you could prepare your learners for the task. For the writing, there's also some sample answers, complete with the assessment from the examiner and some comments. So that can help you get your head around how to assess the writing and the speaking. And there's also some material there for developing reading skills for CEQs. I would highly recommend take a look at that website because there's just so much there for teachers. There's guides not just for the writing, the assessment of the writing, but also for speaking. So there's a lot of useful information there that you can use. Also, in terms of helping your learners develop, Josh mentioned that very often, if we're looking at reading, there could be a positive impact on our learners' writing. One thing you might be interested in for your learners is that at Cambridge we have this Write and Improve service. Basically, it's free. People can go here, they can select a writing task, they can write a response to it, and then they will get some feedback on it. So it can just be a useful way if you want to help your learners develop their autonomy in terms of their writing practice. I've also included a link to the Teachers Hub, which is something new from Cambridge. It's got worksheets for more for primary level learners, but it does have also like an AI powered lesson planner, which can be quite useful for obviously for planning lessons. And there's some more information there about Cambridge English qualifications. And also, if you would like to follow not just me, but also my colleagues in the professional learning and development team, I've included our LinkedIn profiles here as well. If you would like my slides, you can find them here using the QR code, but I'll also copy and paste the link into the chat box for you. And I think Josh has a copy as well. So
We'll be sending
yeah.
them out. So everyone who attends live will be receiving a certificate, and we'll put the slides in there too.
Great. And so finally, before we finish, does anyone have any questions?
They do have a lot of thanks. I can see that.
Uh,
Okay.
well, that's good. Has anything appeared? Ah, still no questions. Right. In that case, thank you very much for your time this evening, and I hope that you found some of the tips and advice I gave useful. I see. Will the writing be checked by AI? Do you mean on the Write and Improve or in the for the exam itself?
I think she's saying the exam
Uh-huh.
you wrote later. Okay.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's my understanding that at the moment, no. Uh, but I mean, technology is evolving, so I I I don't know what the future holds in that regard. What I would say though is if you do want to find out more about just how the writing is marked, I'd highly recommend take a look at that teacher's handbook and take a look at the comments from the examiner. There's also the guides to writing assessment, which you can find on that web page for the B2 First for Schools, and they really are quite detailed. They have descriptions of all the different criteria and a glossary of what some of the key terms in the descriptions of the criteria mean. And they also have some tasks there that you can do either individually or with colleagues to help strengthen your assessment skills in terms of writing for the exam. So that's a really good place to start.
Look, with that, I'd like to thank Ben very much, and for the previous webinars for Charles as well. And then look, everyone at Cambridge, I think it's been a really nice collaboration to have with Cambridge in the webinars, but also all the other things we do with Cambridge at MLA. And thanks, I'm sure from all the participants. I can see it all coming in now. And look, thanks to all the participants too.
Mhm.
Okay, it's this is the last of our webinars for the season. So MLA is going to be concentrating on our summer centres that we run in the UK, Ireland, and America and Canada, and for the next few months. But we'll be back in September. Hopefully, we'll have be able to organise something again with Cambridge because it's been very popular, and we thank them a lot. But I wish everyone happy holidays for all the teachers we have in the chat, and thanks again to all our participants and to you, Ben. Okay,
You're
thanks a
welcome.
lot. Okay, bye everyone.